Thank you, Chair, and very nice to meet both of you. My pleasure and a privilege to be here as a new Member of Parliament under the 45th General Election. So thank you for making sure that that went smoothly, and my local returning officer, Joni Swidnicki, is a wonderful person. She did a great job in Brandon Souris. So wasn't originally going to start here, but I am just curious because you mentioned about the pencil issue. So would it be beneficial, I guess, to just go back to Elections Canada providing pens at voting booths in order to deal with this misinformation issue that was out there? Is that something that you would consider going forward, is going back to pens?
It's something that so to be clear, I don't believe we ever did use pens at polling stations. We've all used, as far as I know, always used pencils. The benefit of pencils, beyond the fact that they are economical, is that they don't dry up. And they don't smudge. So if you start using ball pens, for example, and you stored them for 4 years and the leftovers stay on for some pencils have been in our boxes for several cycles. They're always working. If you buy pens, you have to verify that they work. And even if they do work, sometimes they may smudge, and that could cause ballots to be rejected. So our preference is for pencils, but we do not disallow the use of pens.
Thank you for that. Just trying to deal with this misinformation issue. There may be an additional cost, but on the information side and dealing with credibility questions about ballot, perhaps that is worth the cost. But when you talk about smudging, for example, I understand that is an issue on the physical ballot itself. But I would like to try, as parliamentarians, I think we all would, to try and combat some of those issues, again, in a nonpartisan fashion if we can. So if there's anything we can do, please let us know. In terms of the report, it was very comprehensive. I agree with my colleagues' comments on that. It states that more than 60% of voter information cards were either mailed late or not at all. And I understand with labor disruptions and just the general context of mail delivery these days, I'm skeptical that is likely to improve going forward. So in terms of the voter information cards themselves, if 60% can't be delivered on time, have they outlived their usefulness? Or what does Elections Canada recommend? Would you consider other types of delivery providers to ensure that 60% figure not getting delivered on time is very high, in my opinion? Have you considered other options to get those cards on time, or are they past their usefulness?
So thank you. That's a very rich question. I'll try to peel the different parts of the onion. Just to be clear, 60% were mailed late. That's after day 24, which the Act provides they should be in the mail at day 24. I believe it's something like 17%. It's a much lower figure that arrived late, and for me, late is after advance polls have begun. So, of course, we want that to happen before advance polls, but it's critical that they be received before polling day. So that's the first point. The second point, Mr. Chair, is that it's not primarily a mail delivery problem. In this election, a challenge that we faced was the inability not of finding but confirming polling locations. In many cases, what we see is that it takes a lot more time to negotiate leases, whether it's school principals, school boards, commercial landlords with lawyers and boards that they report to, having to validate and approve the leases in a way that was not the case before. So it's no longer a handshake or a phone call and a quick signature. It's a long process. And then the returning officer moves to Plan B, and Plan B is the same long process, and Plan C is the same long process. So the main challenge, is securing polling locations in a timely way, and that's why I said that the calendar in a fixed date is not a problem, but outside of a fixed date, that really creates an important pain point.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question, because I know I'm running out of time in this round, about my constituency. I heard a lot, and again, I'm a new candidate, about a couple of locations, Hobbs Manor in Brandon, which is a seniors' residence, and La Riviere and Cypress River, two communities that have had polling stations in them for time immemorial. Nobody can remember an election where they didn't have a federal polling station. All of those places did not have one this time. So has the population threshold to have a polling location changed as part of this election? Or why would these long-standing communities that have always had a polling location not have had one? It, particularly in the two rural towns, it severely impacted because there is no public transit available in these communities to get to the next community over for residents to be able to vote, etc. So it was a significant barrier for all of those locations.
And I do appreciate that. We did not raise the threshold in any way for locations for assigning polls. We had more polls in this election than in previous elections. The ability to find one that is suitable in the right location is where the challenge is. So it's not about Elections Canada wanting to reduce the number of polls, quite the contrary. For me, especially for polling day, the last chance to vote, proximity voting has always been top of mind and is critical, and that's one thing that we strive to achieve. If I may,
we have 2 hours. Yes, I will.
On your initial question, we are looking at options, so voters can go online at any time and find their polling location. Of course, once it's confirmed, they don't need to wait for their voter information card. We would like to allow electors to download their voter information card in digital format. Now, that would not replace the paper one because for some electors, that's just not an option. But I do believe that over time, the paper voter information card may go away. But that's not for the immediate future. I think we need to have multiple layers as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Perot and Mr. Roussel, for being here with us. And thank you for a very thorough report on the 45th general election. Interesting reading. And it's an immense undertaking to have a general election in a fair and conclusive manner. But there were some challenges, which you highlight in the report. And I want to talk about one which hits close home to me in the riding of Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, which is right across the river from my riding of Langley Township, Fraser Heights. So just to set the context, the special ballots that were cast in that riding by electors who did not live in that riding amounted to 822 ballots, and they were not counted.
They were not counted to be included in the official count because so they will be reflected, except where there are issues with secrecy of the vote. They will be reflected alongside the official count.
Okay, so that's important to know. There were 7 electors in my riding. It wouldn't have made a difference, and your report does highlight that. You say the outcome would not have affected any of the 74 impacted districts, mine being one of them. That is true. There were 7 ballots that were cast by people living in my riding, and happily I won by more than 7 votes. So even if they had all gone the other way, I still would have won. But I want to tell those people your vote actually did count, because this is what I tell everybody. When I'm knocking on doors, they go, "Mr. Van Poppy, you're going to win anyways. It doesn't matter if I vote." I go, "It matters a lot.
It matters.
Every vote counts."
Mr. Chair, apologies for interrupting. It matters. I wholeheartedly agree. And to all extent possible, we want to make sure that every valid vote is reflected, is counted. Now, if for some error that happens after validation, that we find out, it cannot be included in the official results. In the case of Coquitlam, a large percentage, I can't remember exactly, of the affected ridings had done their validation when the issue arose, so that was not a possibility. It was nevertheless important to be very transparent about the situation, because some of those ridings were fairly close, not so close that it would have made a difference, but perhaps sufficiently so in the case of a recount. And it was critical that the candidates in those ridings be made aware of the number of votes that potentially would have affected their election, and should they wish to do so, could have raised this in the context of a recount. So after validation, if we find out, we need to be very quick to be transparent to make sure that these rights can be properly exercised.
So what happens if if this is discovered after validation? I just need to be clear on that. Would they be, and if the outcome would have been different, yes, would it have been a recount, or would you have invalidated the prior validation?
So that's a good question. I don't have, this is not something that we've encountered before. I would be very reluctant, but I won't rule it out, to undo a validation. I think that could be seen as circumventing the remedy in the Act for recounts. My preference would be to make the information available to the court in a recount so that the judge may take into account those votes. And leave the court process to determine that. There are several, guardrails and remedies in our system, and that's a good thing. Obviously, we don't like to see contested election, and so the recount or the validations are the two opportunities to make sure that the right candidate has been elected.
I'm going to give you a hypothetical. I'm looking at the 74 ridings, and they're written out in your reports and alphabetically. I looked up Terrebonne just when Ms. Normandin was asking some questions, and it is not listed there. So nobody in Coquitlam voted in the Terrebonne election. But if it had been, what difference would that have made to a declaration in that Quebec riding?
Had that been the case, my hope is that the information being available could have been taken into account by the judge in the recount, so before going to a contested election.
What are you going to do to make sure this never happens again? And what actually did happen? Like a ballot box got lost. How can that possibly happen?
So in the case of Coquitlam, we have a situation where there was confusion about the process. We have a team there that worked provincially and was confused with the different rules. Provincially in BC, the special ballots are sent to the headquarters after the election for the count. Federally, that's not the case. Now, this is something that ought to have been understood. It's very clear in our material, but we will, and we have begun to look at all the controls that can be implemented to make sure that these kinds of errors are picked up immediately and corrected before validation. So I've indicated publicly, Mr. Chair, that we will be introducing changes to our processes.
30 seconds over, but it was an excellent question, and used my prerogative. I would have wanted to hear the answer. So thank you,
Chair. I'll try to keep these very brief. There were 57,440 ballots cast by electors living outside of Canada voting by mail, according to your report. That is a significant increase from the 27,035 cast in the 44th general election. Just wondering if you would be willing to submit to the committee a breakdown of which electoral districts these ballots were counted in.
Certainly, that's something that I can commit to providing after, of course, this session. Yes.
Wonderful. All three measures of accuracy for the list of electors, coverage, currency, and accuracy, were lower for this election than the previous general election, and in fact, I think they were lower than the election before that as well. So accuracy is trending down in these three categories since 2019. What are the causes of that, and do you think that's acceptable to deliver a secure and fair election, or what are you doing to address those indicators trending downward?
So I certainly agree that the quality of a list is critical to the quality of the election, both in terms of making it accessible and the integrity of the process. So that's something that's important. Right now we have a coverage, or at the election we had the coverage of 95.2%. That is very slightly lower than in the past elections, very comparable, and an accuracy of 92.2, again slightly lower. If you compare that to 2019, which is a fixed date election, it was slightly higher, just over 96 coverage, because of the fact that we have the ability in a fixed date to do information campaigns ahead of the election and to promote people going on to the register ahead of time and either adding themselves or moving themselves if they have moved. So it is not at all surprising that you would see a difference between fixed date elections and non-fixed date elections. The numbers that we have here are comparable and historically on the high end of accuracy and coverage for the National Register of Electors.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, so comparing the numbers from 2021 to this election, two non-fixed date elections, but still less this time around than in 2021?
Yes, in 2021 we may have carried over a bit of the benefits. The difference between 21 and 25 are are marginal. They're more significant between fixed date 19 and 25. So it's likely, I would speculate, that we carried over some of the benefits of the 2019 election into 2021. Whereas we have a longer time period here between the two elections, between 21 and 25, and so there's a bit of a degradation, a slight degradation of the coverage and accuracy.
And if I may, the safety net during the election is the revision. Any elector can go on our website, call the office of the returning officers and get the record updated if needs be. So we had 1.3 million electors at the last election who did so, and which is in line a little more than we had in the 44th GE, to your point. But is way less than the 2.8 millions that we saw at the inception of the National Register of Electors 20 years ago. So the long arc of history, if I may say, goes in the right direction with respect to the coverage, currency, and accuracy of the National Register of Electors.
Thank you. And just my final question, your report talks about disinformation, as you mentioned, particularly on social media elsewhere, and the setup of a web page in many different languages that talks about what interference in elections, what pressure would look like, that type of thing. I'm just wondering how much activity did that section of your website get during this election, of voters coming forward and saying, I think I might have been influenced, I feel, this type of thing? And what does the process look like when you, as Elections Canada, get reports where people are concerned about activity that pressuring, that's taking place, pressuring people in elections? And where do you take that information? What does the process look like to ensure that those potential threats to a voter or voters are taken seriously and addressed?
So thank you. Just to be clear, the multimedia campaign in 50 languages is not really about, it is about information. It's about the basic information about the electoral process. It's not, it helps to fight disinformation, but it's different than the information on our website. We have, for example, electoral facts, which I mentioned earlier, which is specifically to correct mis or disinformation. So there are different tools that we have in place to promote correct information. As I said, we have a social media monitoring team, and when we see incorrect information, we have pre-approved responses that are prepared, that are ready to go, and that we can use our social media platforms to communicate directly to those voters on those platforms. When something new arises that is not captured by our pre-existing message, then there's an escalation process and a decision is made. In some cases, you have to decide whether an intervention would provide greater attention to someone who's posting than not, and measure the quality or the risk to the process that the misinformation carries. So there's a judgment as to when we intervene and with what kind of information. We always want to be factual, never provide opinion. We never say, for example, this is why you can trust election. We say, here are the safeguards. And so we let people make up their minds. So there's judgment as to what kind of language we use. But there's a process in place with a team to escalate if it's new, not pre-approved messages.
Thank you so much.